There are stories of leadership that begin with gunfire, with speeches, with those blazing historic moments captured under the glare of camera lights. But there are also stories that begin in silence, in the soft click of a door opening past midnight, in the tired silhouette of a man who never allows himself to collapse, even while carrying an entire nation through a storm. And in that moment, before the world calls him by grand titles, he is simply a husband stepping quietly so he will not wake the 3 children sleeping in the next room. That is the image no one ever sees on television. No flags waving, no chants rising, no media capturing every step. Only him, shoes still dusty, uniform worn at the shoulders, just as it was that morning. And a small home standing still in the Ouagadougou night, waiting for him the way it has waited for years. That home is not in a grand estate. There are no towering steel gates, no lines of escort vehicles. It is simply a place where the clinking of a spoon against a pot, the scent of warm rice, the breath of sleeping children, and the soft noon prayers form the soundtrack of life. People talk about revolutions as something monumental, iron-willed, larger than life. But few ever speak of where revolutionaries go at the end of a long day, who they return to, who sees the fine lines at the corners of their eyes before the world ever notices, who stays silent so they can breathe without bracing themselves against political storms, and who gives them a peace no position of power could ever provide. For IBRAHIM Traoré, that place has a name soft as water, steady as stone, Yasmina. A woman who does not appear before crowds, who never stands behind a podium, who does not post online about the dangers her husband faces or the nights he barely sleeps. Yasmina chooses silence. But it is not the silence of hiding, it is the silence of someone who keeps the fire alive. There is something few people know. Long before the world called him the youngest president, long before the flag of Burkina Faso rose high after marches, long before headlines rippled across the continent, he was once a young man walking to the library to study, a man who wrote letters by hand every 3 weeks, a man who kept his wedding ring in his uniform pocket through the harshest months of training, and in that ordinary beginning, she was already there, Yasmina. The world tends to notice the noise, the big decisions, the firm declarations, the diplomatic trips, but it does not see what happens after the doors close. It does not hear the sound of late-night dishes being put away. It does not witness 3 children running into his arms, their faces pressed against a uniform covered in red dust. It does not see Yasmina's quiet nod from the kitchen, a nod that replaces 1,000 questions she never needs to ask. Yet these small moments are where a real revolution is sustained. Because a man cannot stand firm in the storm if he has no place to find himself again. A nation cannot have strong leadership if its leader has no anchor. And a fight for dignity cannot endure if the one carrying the flame does not have someone at home protecting its light. This story does not begin with politics. It does not begin with the events that altered Burkina Faso's history. It begins with a question that seems simple but holds the soul of the entire journey. When a man steps away from the front lines, who is waiting for him at home? When you understand that question, you understand the whole story. You understand why a young man from Bobo-Dioulasso could become the symbol of a generation. You understand why he never loses his humility, never chooses excess, never abandons the roots that shaped him. Because he knows that no matter how fierce the storms outside become, there is always a place he can return to. A place where the revolution is left at the doorstep. A place where he is not a president. He is simply IBRAHIM, and that is the beginning of the story you are about to hear. A story of family, of love, of silence more powerful than any speech, and of the woman who ensures that every revolution has a home to return to. Bobo-Dioulasso is not a capital city, not a center of power, and not the place international media rush to whenever Burkina Faso faces upheaval. But for those born here, this city carries its own rhythm. The rhythm of djembe drums echoing through the late afternoons, the rhythm of mango-lined streets, the rhythm of thousands of simple stories passed down through generations. And right there, among clay houses and soft morning mist, a girl named Yasmina grew up quiet but full of inner strength. People say that when Yasmina was little, every evening her father Amadou would sit beneath the neem tree in their yard and read history books to his children. He was a former teacher, a man who spent his entire life showing students that a homeland is not just a place on a map, but something reflected in how people treat one another. People remember him for his warm, steady voice, for the way he spoke the name Thomas Sankara as if it was not just a leader's name, but a reminder of dignity. Amadou was not wealthy, but he was rich in faith. He believed in education, in ethics, in honesty as a form of power no one could ever steal. Yasmina's mother, Fatiara, was a different kind of lifeline in the city. A midwife who delivered hundreds of babies, she carried the gentleness of hands that had welcomed countless new lives into the world. People here called her Tanti Fati, the way one would address a beloved aunt. She never came home empty-handed, sometimes a piece of woven cloth gifted by someone, sometimes ripe mangoes left by a patient. People used to say that walking into her home felt like stepping into a place where worries paused, as if her warmth alone could soften even the hardest days. Between those two sources of strength, Yasmina grew up with a rare blend of stillness and resolve. She was the second of 4 siblings, not the one who talked the most, not the one who drew the most attention. But people still noticed her in a crowd. They noticed the gentleness of her steps, the way her eyes listened, the smile that never felt rushed. She carried a quiet kind of beauty, a presence that made others lower their voices naturally when standing near her, not out of fear, out of respect. At school, teachers often said Yasmina never needed to fight for attention. Her calmness made people pay attention on its own. When she recited poems in class, her voice was neither loud nor forceful, but every word lingered in the minds of those who listened. She loved poetry, loved stories that spoke about the strength of softness. She read a Mariam Abba, drawn to women who stood firm from within. She read a Nawal el-Saadawi in silence, without showing off, without labeling herself as progressive. But everyone could sense she had a private world of her own, a world far larger than her years. Neighbors still remember young Yasmina each morning, wearing her neatly wrapped hijab, stepping out with her school bag held close. She would stop to help an elderly neighbor carry water or pour tea for her father's guests. Small acts, but small acts reveal who a person truly is. Her older brother Karim joined the military early, just as their father once hoped. Her sister Aminata trained to be a nurse, carrying on their mother's compassion. Her youngest brother Ibrahim chased his dream of becoming an engineer in Côte d'Ivoire. And Yasmina, among all the choices available to her, chose to stay, not because she lacked ambition, but because she saw value in what others might overlook. She stayed in Bobo-Dioulasso to study literature, she stayed to teach, she stayed to continue the family values she was raised with. People say that when Yasmina walked into a room, the atmosphere softened, not because she tried to make it so, but because peace naturally flowed from her. Some people are born to listen, some are born to be seen. Yasmina was born to be trusted. No one at the time knew that this quiet girl from Bobo-Dioulasso would one day become the backbone of one of the youngest leaders on the continent. No one knew that her calm would one day become a silent shield protecting a revolution. But everything she later became began here, in this place where village drums blended with morning prayers, where a little girl grew up surrounded by love, discipline, and compassion, and where the roots of a future revolution began not in the trenches, but in the heart of a quiet young woman. When you understand where Yasmina came from, you understand why IBRAHIM Traoré carries simplicity in every step. Because the greatest parts of a person are often shaped in the smallest of places. Not every great love begins with a heart that suddenly races. Some loves have no lightning strike, No romantic story to retell to friends, no lingering glances or smiles held longer than they should be. Some loves begin in silence, as if neither person realizes that fate has already started writing a new chapter for them. The first meeting between Yasmina and Ibrahim Traoré happened exactly like that. Not at a ceremony, not in a crowd, not in some special moment. Just two young people sitting in the same library. That space was always quiet. Light from tall windows spilled across rows of old wooden tables. The sound of turning pages blended with the soft scratch of pens moving across notebooks. Yasmina sat in her familiar corner, the place where she found peace in literature. Ibrahim sat a few seats away, focused on geology texts, his eyebrows slightly drawn as if trying to solve a difficult problem. Neither paid attention to the other, and there was no reason they should. Her world was made of words. His world was built from minerals and rock layers. Two people, two paths, two completely different rhythms. But sometimes opposites begin with a coincidence so small it almost feels accidental. That day, Yasmina was struggling with a difficult paragraph in French. Ibrahim looked up at the exact moment she paused her pen, lost in thought. He tilted his head a little, then asked a simple question, spoken softly enough for only the two of them to hear. "Do you need any help?" Yasmina shook her head lightly, thanking him in a voice so soft it nearly blended into the air. Then they both returned to their own worlds. No additional words, no long looks, no flicker of attraction. Just two strangers sitting near each other on an afternoon like any other. But strangely, the next week, they met again in the library. And the week after that, no plans, no searching, yet still they met in school hallways, in the courtyard where students ate lunch, in the grounds of the mosque during prayer time. Each time they simply nodded. Still no confessions, no deliberate attempts to get closer, but something was quietly forming, something neither of them had named yet. What drew Ibrahim to Yasmina was not her appearance, not her presence, but the way she did everything with calmness. She did not talk much, yet every word was clear. She never needed to prove anything, yet others respected her. She listened before speaking. And when she did speak, it was always at the right moment. As for Yasmina, what made her remember Ibrahim was even simpler. He was not loud, not boastful, not trying to seem strong, a rare quality for a young man. He always seemed focused, always read with a seriousness that made it look like the outside world was waiting for him to awaken it. He never looked at her longer than necessary, never tried to impress, but when they did speak, even just a few short sentences, she sensed sincerity without performance. It was a quiet affection, unhurried, without demands, like water flowing over stone, silent but powerful in its own way. No crashing waves, no storms, but steady. By the end of 2011, when they had grown familiar with each other's faces, voices, and presence, Ibrahim finally asked the question that changed everything. "Would you allow me to meet your parents?" Not every girl dreams of hearing that question, but for Yasmina, it did not surprise her. It came naturally, just as they had gone from strangers to two people walking in the same rhythm. She agreed, not because he was extraordinary, not because her heart was confused, but because she saw honesty in him, something her father always taught her. A man does not need to say much, only what is right. And so they began a journey without fireworks. No dazzling dates, no photos together, no dramatic declarations of love. They talked after class, they exchanged books, they shared small pieces of each day. Some relationships burn like fire, but others glow like embers. And it is the embers that last long enough to warm a lifetime.
I'll focus to West Africa, where Russia continues to deepen its ties
It
and
arrived
expand.
slowly, steadily, deeply enough that nothing could shake it. Young people often fall in love through closeness. But the love between Ibrahim and Yasmina began with distance. A kind of distance that was not forced, not painful, but quietly tested two people who were already familiar with the stillness inside themselves. Their love was not built through hand-holding on crowded streets. It was built through long stretches of not seeing each other, not knowing when the other would return. A love that grew from absence, yet was never lacking. After graduating in 2012, Ibrahim stepped into the most challenging phase of his life, military training. Yasmina returned to Bobo-Dioulasso and began teaching literature at a secondary school. They stood at opposite ends of a journey neither knew the length of. During the first months, life settled into its new rhythm. He trained, studied techniques, moved from place to place. She taught classes, went home each day, continued the peaceful routine she had always known. For many people, distance would have pushed them apart. But between them, silence never became emptiness. It became a space where love took on a clearer shape. They did not have long phone calls. They did not have the internet to send messages every day. They only had letters, one letter from Ibrahim every 3 weeks. Short, firm handwriting, nothing decorative. He wrote about where he had been transferred, how the weather was, what the training drills were like, and he always ended his letters with one simple line, "Live as you always do, I will return." Yasmina never replied immediately. She wrote once a month, not because she was distant, but because she wanted each letter to be full, complete, sincere. She wrote about her students, about her mother delivering a baby for a familiar family, about her father finding an old Sankara book to save for Ibrahim's return. No passionate declarations, no dramatic promises, but every line carried the one thing that mattered, absolute trust. And that trust made their love stronger. When two people go long without seeing each other, what keeps them together is never fleeting emotion. It is the belief that the other is living exactly as you think they are, holding steady, walking their own path with integrity. That was what Yasmina saw in Ibrahim, a man who never exaggerated, a man who did more than he said, a man who kept moving forward without losing humility. And Ibrahim, though hundreds of kilometers away, could still feel in Yasmina a peace no place on earth could replace. Sometimes the letters arrived late, sometimes he was so busy he could not write on time, but never once did Yasmina complain, because she understood. And what made Ibrahim cherish her was not her words, but that understanding. People can find love anywhere, but to find someone who understands you without explanation is rare. In the dry season of 2013, Ibrahim returned home for a short visit. No warning, no planned meeting. He simply stood at Yasmina's door one evening as the light was fading. She opened the door and looked at him. She did not run to him. She did not cry. She did not say anything. She simply widened the door so he could step inside. And he understood. That was her way of saying she had been waiting. They had only 2 days together, 2 days with nothing romantic in the usual sense. They visited both families. They ate meals in the yard. They spoke little, but every word held the quiet certainty of two people who already knew where they belonged. Then he left again. The distance stretched out again. But this time, it was no longer a test. It became a natural part of their relationship. They were not afraid of distance. They were not afraid of losing each other, because what bound them was not daily presence. It was the trust built from the smallest things. Their love did not bloom like flowers in the rainy season. It was like a seed placed in dry soil, surviving sun, wind, and seasons without rain. And because it could survive, its roots grew deep. So when Ibrahim returned again in 2014 and stood before Yasmina's family to ask for her hand in marriage, no one was surprised, because this love did not need proof. It had already been built by distance. And what is built by distance is often the most enduring of all. Some weddings are remembered for their extravagance. Others are remembered for music, for dancing, for laughter echoing late into the night. And then there are weddings remembered not for what people saw, but for what only the two hearts inside it understood. The wedding of Ibrahim and Yasmina belonged to that last group, small, quiet, but carrying a weight that grand celebrations could never hold. a weight made of trust. Of two people choosing each other, not because of fleeting emotion, but because they knew the life ahead would require far more endurance than tender words. On the 10th of October 2014, Bobo-Dioulasso looked like any other day. Children played under mango trees. Smoke from cooking fires drifted along narrow alleys. Women selling grains sat together, working and chatting. No one knew that inside a modest home, a small event was taking place, one that would bind two destinies and later quietly thread itself into the destiny of a nation. The ceremony happened in the yard beneath the old neem tree that Yasmina's family had lived with for years. This was not a lavish event, no elegant tables, no expensive decorations, no stage. Only mats laid on the ground, wooden chairs borrowed from neighbors, a pot of hot tea, a few chipped cups, and slow, steady prayers spoken by the elders. Yasmina wore a traditional turquoise outfit. No sequins, no crown, no heavy makeup. Her beauty did not need adornment. Her eyes were calm as still water. Ibrahim wore simple white attire, standing beside her with the humility of a man who understood he was stepping into a responsibility greater than any battle he had ever faced. Both families sat in a small circle. Yasmina's father, Amadou, placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. He said nothing, but everyone saw the pride in his eyes. Her mother, Fatiara, stood behind her, hands trembling with emotion, though her smile remained steady. Ibrahim's family, people familiar with simplicity and discipline, also sat quietly, as if the solemnity of the moment came precisely from its humility. When Ibrahim asked for her hand, his voice was soft but firm. He did not speak flowery words. He did not make impossible promises. He simply said he wanted to build a home with Yasmina, a place where respect came before love, that he did not yet know what the future would bring, but he knew who he wanted by his side through every rise and fall. Yasmina responded with a single sentence, one that no one present would ever forget. "I do not choose your path, but I choose to walk beside you." A simple line, but it carried the soul of their marriage. She did not step into Ibrahim's life to change him or to hide behind him. She stepped in to stand strong with him while remaining fully herself. The prayers began. The air grew still, the wind brushed lightly through the leaves above. A few neighborhood children ran past laughing. A cat wandered into the yard, then slipped away again. These little details made the moment so real that nothing could have replaced it. When the elders offered their blessings, they did not wish the couple wealth or power. They wished for something far more important: patience, compassion, faith. In a country where challenges come without warning, a marriage cannot rely on emotion alone. It requires the courage of two people who know that some days will be harder than they ever imagined. After the ceremony, there was no grand feast, only white rice, grilled meat, sweet tea, and gentle conversations shared between the two families. Yasmina did not change her outfit. Ibrahim did not take dozens of photos. No one felt the need to share the moment with the world, because to them, the most sacred part of the day was that it still belonged entirely to them. The wedding was small, but the vow inside it was great. Not a vow spoken through elaborate phrases, but through the way they stood beside each other, through the calmness, the certainty, the quiet respect they exchanged. A vow that Ibrahim would keep even through the darkest months his country would later face. And Yasmina, unseen by the world, would remain the keeper of the flame. The wedding drew no attention from newspapers, but to those who witnessed it, they felt something rare, something a person may encounter only once in a lifetime. A love that does not flare brightly, but one that never fades. Some children are born in the rainy season, some in the dry season, and some arrive in the world during quiet upheavals that even adults cannot quite name. The three children of Ibrahim and Yasmina belong to the last group. They entered the world at different moments in their parents' lives, but they all shared one thing in common. Each child brought light into the home, even when the country outside was drowning in challenges. Their first child, Isa, arrived in May 2016, On the day he was born, the sun shone over Bobo-Dioulasso, yet the air felt cooler than usual, as if nature itself softened to welcome a new soul. Yasmina held her son in her arms, her eyes filled with a calm even her closest family had never seen in her. Ibrahim, though he had witnessed many powerful moments in the military, stood silent for a long while, unable to speak. He looked at his son with the understanding that from this moment forward, every step he took would be heavier, but also steadier. Issa grew exactly like the day he was born, gentle, observant, speaking less than he watched. His eyes resembled Ibrahim's in a striking way. Quiet eyes, but when someone looked into them, they knew there was depth behind the silence. From a young age, Issa rarely cried, rarely demanded, but always loved sitting beside his mother when she read. He listened even when he could not understand, as if the sound of words woven together had become part of his childhood. In 2018, as Burkina Faso began entering some of its hardest years, their second child was born. They named the little girl Hail Lima. Unlike her brother, she arrived with a loud cry and wide-open eyes, as if she wanted to take in the entire world in her first breath. She had a natural curiosity, touching everything, asking about everything, exploring every corner, and each question from her was like a small flame of life blooming inside the modest home. Hail Lima resembled Yasmina in sensitivity, in her ability to feel other people's emotions, but she mirrored Ibrahim in determination. A child who could run without tiring, ask without fear of the answer, laugh in a way that lit up the whole room. Many said that if Issa was stillness, then Hail Lima was motion. But both rhythms made the home complete, like day and night, like earth and sky. In 2021, their youngest, Yesef, was born. At that time, the future of the country felt more uncertain than ever. Ibrahim was rarely home, overwhelmed with responsibilities. But on the day his second son was born, he found a way to return. Yesef truly entered the world in a storm, not only the storm facing the nation, but the storm in Ibrahim's own life, a moment when the weight on his shoulders was at its heaviest. Yesef cried loudly, slept little, and laughed often. A child bursting with energy, as if trying to fill the missing pieces of time his father could not give because of his duty to the country. Yasmina once said that if Issa was sunrise and Hail Lima was midday, then Yesef was sunset. A sunset, bright, vivid, but sometimes carrying dark patches that made you watch closely. The three children grew up in a small house on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, far from flashing cameras, far from the curiosity of the press, far from the heavy matters adults had to face. Yasmina raised them with the principles her own parents had taught her. No spoiling, no harsh control. Every day had a time for prayer, a time for study, a time for chores, and a time for silence. Those routines gave the children, though born at different chapters, the same foundation, peace. There were evenings when Ibrahim came home very late. He opened the door as quietly as he could. But before he could fully step inside, little feet would rush across the floor to cling to him. Every hug carried the same truth. No matter how violently the country outside was shaking, inside this home there were three children waiting for him. And these three children were the reason he could never allow himself to fall. They were born in storms, but storms did not make them fragile. They grew strong in their own ways, each with a unique personality, a unique destiny. Yet together, they formed the quiet anchor for the man carrying a nation on his shoulders. During the years when Burkina Faso faced turmoil, when explosions along the border shook the ground, when the daily news carried only heavy shadows, there was one place that remained still. A small house on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, far from the center, with no sign, no high walls, no hint that it was the home of the country's leader. A house where peace came not from brick and cement, but from the steadfast hearts living inside it. The house had 3 bedrooms, a small living room, a kitchen place near the back door to catch the breeze, and a little yard where the children could run every afternoon. There were no expensive furnishings, no decorative paintings, nothing that hinted at power. Yasmina always said the most beautiful home is the one where people live honestly, not the one built to impress. So every wall, every bookshelf, every chair carried the breath of a simple life. The kitchen was always the brightest place, not because of the light, but because Yasmina was there. Each morning she rose before the sky, boiled water, read a few verses from the Quran, then prepared breakfast for the 3 children. The smell of fried onions, warm rice, and sweet tea drifted through the air. It was the scent of peace. A scent that told the children that no matter what was happening outside, the world inside this home remained steady. Their days followed a clear rhythm: morning for reciting scripture, reading and learning numbers, noon for lunch and quiet rest, afternoon for running, watering plants, pulling weeds, sweeping the yard, evening for reading books and writing in notebooks. Yasmina did not spoil her children. She taught them responsibility, discipline, and most importantly, gratitude. When the house had food, she taught them to be thankful, because many families outside did not. When their father came home, she taught them to listen, because some days he had seen things no child should hear about. In this home, everything had a place. Not a place of material value, but of meaning. The old radio on the kitchen shelf that played Quran recitations every afternoon, the scarf Yasmina wore when she stepped outside, the woven cloth her mother gave her on her wedding day. A few family photos without frames taped to the wall, as if the home feared becoming too formal and losing its warmth. And there was one rule Yasmina always kept. No one started eating until everyone was seated. Even if Ibrahim returned late, even if the children were hungry, even if the food had cooled. She said it was not a rule, but a reminder that family is the presence of one another, that a meal is only complete when no one is left behind. Ibrahim returned home in the dark. He opened the door quietly, as if afraid to wake the world. Those careful steps were not because he was tired, but because each return reminded him that this was the one place where he was allowed to be vulnerable. He did not bring in the noise of conflict. He did not bring in the heavy decisions of a long day. He left everything outside the door and stepped in with empty hands, carrying only the heart of a father. The children ran to hug him. Each embrace was a rope tying him back to what made every sacrifice worth it. These moments were never recorded, no cameras, no audience, but they were the moments where a man regained his balance. Yasmina stood in the kitchen, turning to smile when she heard his steps. That smile did not ask a single question, yet it spoke more than any language could express. You're home. Everything is all right. The children and I are here. It was a peace not born from perfect safety, but from trust. Trust that no matter how fierce the storms outside became, this home would stand, not because of strong walls, but because of the hearts that lived within it. From this home, Ibrahim stepped out each morning with renewed strength, because he knew that behind him were not applause, but 3 growing children who needed an example. A wife who asked for nothing except peace for her family. And in this small house, in the middle of the nation's most turbulent days, another kind of strength was being shaped. A strength not born from speeches, but from the quiet endurance of the ones who kept the fire alive. Some women are seen through their words, through their bold actions, through the light of the stage. Others are strong in a different way, through silence, through quiet gestures that only those closest can recognize. Yasmina is one of them. She does not need the media, the public, or photos and articles to prove her role. Her strength exists in ordinary moments, yet it shapes the lives of those she loves. Since the 2022 coup, Yasmina has almost vanished from public view. No interviews, no articles, no mention in official statements. This was her choice. Not out of fear, not to hide, but because she understood that sometimes strength needs silence to endure. She knew her husband carried the weight of the nation, and her task was to keep their home peaceful, to raise their 3 children safely, and to ensure that the man she loved always had a place to return. Every day, Yasmina wakes earlier than everyone else. She prays, washes her face, prepares breakfast. Small, steady actions, but not a single moment wasted. In silence, she observes. She knows what each child is thinking, every cry or laugh carrying its own message. She teaches them responsibility without shouting. She teaches gratitude without moralizing. She instills calm, attentiveness, and the ability to find strength within themselves. When Ibrahim returns, he always finds Yasmina in the kitchen or the garden, hands dusted with soil, a quiet smile of steadfast assurance on her face. He brings stories from the borders, tense meetings, historic days. Yet the moment he enters the house, all tension seems to dissolve. Only the peace Yasmina has created remains. She does not question him about politics, does not argue decisions, does not remind him of duties. She simply exists enough for him to breathe, enough for him to find himself again. Some might think silence is emptiness, invisibility, but for Yasmina it is power, the power of consistency, of trust, of choice. She chooses silence not to hide, but to reserve all her energy for what matters most: her family, faith, and the future of her children. That silence makes every small act meaningful. When she prepares breakfast, reminds the children to wash their hands, or arranges books for them to read, every gesture becomes part of the strongest message. Love and responsibility do not need words to be proven. That same silence makes Yasmina a steady anchor for Ibrahim on long nights. After he has faced pressure and danger, she does not ask too many questions. She simply looks at him, smiles, letting him know he is still accepted, still safe, still has a place to lay down the burdens of life. Small gestures, a pour of tea, folding blankets for the children, holding his hand for a moment, are enough to remind a leader that true strength does not always need to be shown. Sometimes the greatest strength is kept quietly, persistently unseen. You can see her in the smallest moments, reading beside a child, quietly journaling each night, listening to Quran on the radio while cooking. Everything is silent, yet it creates a rhythm strong enough to keep the family running smoothly. That quiet presence allows the three children to grow normally amid political and social storms, and keeps Ibrahim from losing himself in decisions that would break others. Yasmina teaches the family that strength does not need to be displayed, that power is not the loud voices outside, but the steadfastness in small daily actions. That love does not need noise, only durability, deep enough to withstand every storm. And she, through her silence, becomes a symbol of true power, quiet, steady, unyielding, needing no recognition from the outside world. In the eyes of the world, Ibrahim Traoré is the youngest president on the continent, a symbol of a revolution in motion, a man shouldering Burkina Faso's heaviest responsibilities. But in the small house on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, he is simply a calm father, a humble husband, a son returning from storms to find peace in his family's arms. That contrast between the public image and the real person is what shapes Traoré's strength and steadiness. He does not lose himself when power arrives. When people think of African leaders, they often imagine luxury cars, grand villas, expensive watches, and pompous ceremonies. Traoré is entirely different. He still wears his uniform, sometimes faded at the shoulders, with worn but clean combat boots. He does not have a private car or helicopter, no lavish amenities to showcase his authority. Returning home, he steps onto the threshold like any father, careful yet confident. His simplicity is not from inability, but from the awareness that the greatest power of a leader is keeping his own truth intact. From afar, his decisions as president may appear intense, even sudden, but in his heart, every choice is grounded in discipline, responsibility, and empathy. Traoré understands that leadership is not about proving to the world that he is powerful, but about ensuring that his actions serve the nation. He does not seek applause, does not want the media to praise him. Instead, he measures success through small changes that people feel. A new road, a hospital built, a field of crops flourishing. People often forget that a leader's strength also lies in keeping his family safe. In that small home, the three children study, play, and grow normally, while outside, political and social upheavals rage and sleepless nights test him. Traoré enters his home after long days, sheds the mental armor he carried outside, and returns to his most ordinary role, father and husband. That return is not a habit, but a way of maintaining balance between man and power. He does not need praise to prove his worth. All the respect Traoré earns comes from his actions, from the consistency between his words and deeds. He does not let power change his nature, nor let position erode his character. At work, he is strict with himself, but never forgets to look at the people with empathy. At home, he is strict about responsibilities, but gentle with his family. That balance creates a unique energy. Authority does not turn into arrogance, and responsibility does not become a burden that breaks him. Traoré does not need photos in expensive suits to assert his place. He still visits villages, speaks with farmers, holds children's hands, but those intimate moments are not for show. They are a reminder that a leader's greatest strength comes from genuine connection with the people he serves. And every time he returns home, he knows Yasmina and the 3 children are the anchors that prevent him from being swept away by the whirlwind of power. What sets Traoré apart is his ability to keep a soft heart amid relentless pressure. He remembers evenings spent studying, the short letters he sent Yasmina when they were apart, the small steps across the library where their first meeting took place. Those memories keep him from being distorted by power, reminding him of what truly matters: family, dignity, humility, and loyalty to himself. A leader can be forgotten by history if he only leaves a mark through titles and achievements. Traoré knows this. He chooses to preserve his true self in all circumstances, choosing simplicity, choosing responsibility to himself before responsibility to the nation. He is living proof that power is not meant to change a person, but to help a person grow while never losing themselves. Every revolution we know is remembered for the steps taken in the streets, the decisions announced in the press, the speeches that move a nation. But few tell the story of revolutions nurtured in silence. These revolutions do not unfold only in public squares or national halls. They begin in homes, through quiet hands, through determined eyes watching every step of the leader. The Traoré family is living proof of this truth. Yasmina is the one who keeps the flame. When Ibrahim faces long meetings, when life and death decisions must be made in minutes, when the media and the world question his ability and ethics, she quietly maintains the peace at home. She sows stability, nurtures trust, and keeps the rhythm of their 3 children's lives. No grand words, no flashy gestures, yet everything she does carries decisive value. Every morning, Yasmina wakes before dawn, washes her face, prepares meals, checks her children's clothes and school supplies. The 3 children have grown accustomed to this rhythm. They grow up knowing that everything at home is prepared carefully, every action has meaning, it is the foundation of patience and responsibility. When their father is away, Yasmina's calm reminds the children that the world is still safe, that adults are steady enough to maintain order and trust. Her silent strength also shows in the way she teaches. No force, no commands, only example, routine, and rhythm. Hours for Quran study, reading, chores, play, and quiet reflection are all carefully structured. Each moment carries a message. Strength does not always need to be loud. Power does not always need to be displayed. And the greatest love is sometimes the quiet, steady presence that endures. When Ibrahim returns after long days, he does not need reminders. Just seeing Yasmina there, looking at him with gentle yet steadfast eyes, lets him know he has a place to come home to. He sets down the burdens of power and war and finds himself again in simple gestures, cooking with the children, listening to small stories, walking through the little garden behind the house as the sun sets. These moments cannot be captured by cameras, but they form the true power of a revolution. The big message from the Traoré family is clear. Every revolution outside needs someone to keep the flame at home. This person may not stand at a podium, may not appear in headlines, may be unknown to the public. Yet it is this steady presence, that allows those who go out to fight to have the strength and focus to achieve great things. The Flame Keeper is where stability, trust, and values are nurtured daily. The children growing up in this atmosphere learn to trust, to remain calm, to love and respect. They see their parents live not for image, not for fame, but for consistency, responsibility, and love. They learn that the greatest power does not come from authority, but from preserving core values in every circumstance. Yasmina has taught Ibrahim and their 3 children that true strength does not need to be proven to the world. It exists in daily consistency, in choosing silence to focus, in living fully by one's own values. Here is the big message. A revolution can endure only when a leader is never truly alone, and there is always a quiet flame at home, keeping his heart alive amid the storms. As darkness fell over Ouagadougou, the city stretched beneath the dim golden lights, yet one house kept its peaceful rhythm. IBRAHIM TRAORÉ returned at night, stepping carefully through the small gate. No cameras, no harsh lights, no cheers from outside. Only silence, enough to hear the heartbeat of the house and the sound of his own steps in the familiar space. The 3 children were still awake, waiting for their father. Hearing his footsteps on the tile, they ran out, eyes shining, laughter ringing through the night. Issa reached up to grasp his father's hand. Hail Lima jumped to hug his belly. Yusuf laughed brightly, as if welcoming the final light of the day. Ibrahim smiled softly, bending down to embrace each child, feeling the warmth and calm that only family could give. These small moments were miracles amid the stormy days of the country. Yasmina stood quietly in the kitchen, spoon in hand. She did not need words. Her smile was enough to tell him that all was well. She was the silent anchor, keeping the rhythm of the home and of his heart. It was thanks to her quiet presence that he could lay down the burdens of power, find his true self again after heavy decisions and nameless pressure. This was a homecoming not just in space, but a return to the self that authority could never erase. In the small living room, the children's laughter, the smell of evening rice, the glow of the ceiling light, formed a simple yet powerful scene. Everything reminded him that the reasons to fight were not fame or position, but ordinary things power could never buy: family, trust, love, and peace. That evening, they sat together, sharing a simple meal, speaking softly. No political discussions, no national decisions, just laughter, children's questions, and the full presence of one another. Ibrahim looked at Yasmina and realized that his greatest strength did not come from power, but from the quiet flame she kept alive for the house, the children, and for him. After the children were tucked into bed, Ibrahim and Yasmina stood together in a silent moment. No words were needed, they understood each other. Strength, responsibility, trust, and love were all distilled in this space, in normalcy, in silent presence, in every breath of the family. As the night deepened, Ibrahim sat beside Yasmina, gazing out at the empty yard, exhaling softly. The world outside was full of turmoil, but in this house, everything stood firm. He knew that no matter how fierce the storms beyond, this home would always be a place to return to, a place where silence carried strength and where love became the surest support for any revolution. Here was where everything began and ended, where a person could find themselves again and gather the strength to keep moving forward. When the story of the Traoré family concludes, what remains is not the details of power or political moves, but the image of a person who preserved his true self, a woman quietly nurturing strength for her family, and 3 children growing up in trust and peace. It is a powerful reminder that every action, however small, has the power to change lives. And you, the listener, can become part of that too. Start by looking around your own life. How many moments can you give your full presence, patience, and love to your family, your friends, or those who need you without anyone knowing? Every kind word, every quiet gesture, every moment of attentive listening is a way to keep the flame of trust and values alive. Just like Yasmina, strength is not always displayed. It is often nurtured in silence and consistency. Think about the commitments you can make to yourself, Traoré has shown that power and responsibility can coexist with authenticity if you know your limits and respect your core. You too can make a difference by living according to the values you believe in, by aligning your words and actions, and by choosing what truly matters each day. Let this story remind you that change does not only come from grand acts or dramatic decisions. It comes from simple, persistent actions maintained day by day. A revolution in your family, in your community, or within yourself also needs quiet flames, like Yasmina kept. It is those flames that keep trust burning, that make love steadfast, and that give every step in your life deeper meaning. Finally, share this story. Let those around you hear about the power of silence, the importance of family, and how one person can remain true to themselves, even amid authority. Comment, discuss, spread these messages so that more people realize they too can be a flame in someone else's life. The story of the Traorés does not end on a page. It ends in action, in the way you uphold values, face challenges, and keep faith alive. Let this story inspire you to keep moving forward, to keep the flame burning, and to show that each person, through patience and love, can create profound change.